3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of mental disorders. So one of the greatest challenges we face as a species today is mental illness. Because it is one thing to recover from an injury in sound mind, but when it is your very mind which is suffering, it can be like a war zone in your head, making a mental illness potentially very difficult to overcome. Therefore, throughout human history, our species has chronicled this ongoing struggle with mental illness. And so now I'm just going to give a few different historical examples of mental disorders that have been documented throughout history. So to begin, first up, we have depression. This is an issue that many people have bouts of at some point in their lives. But occasionally depression can become so severe that a person will even need medication to function for it today. But when we think about depression historically, the concept of this type of illness dates all the way back to ancient Greece, where it was even then recognized as a serious mental disorder. In fact, one of the first people to try and understand the causes of depression was the ancient Greek Dr. Hippocrates, about 2,500 years ago. And unfortunately, here we are still to this very day struggling to understand the complexities of depression. But with that being said, especially in culture today and social media, though we are finding that more people are having depression, it's also important to recognize, what's not depression, and that even if you are sad, sometimes that's also a normal human state. It would actually be kind of strange if someone was happy all the time or things are always going your way, because that's just not how human psychology works. So really, when it comes to getting diagnosed with depression, it depends a lot on how sad someone is and how much it's interfering with their lives. Regardless of one's level of sadness, we do know, though, that oftentimes, especially in a very technologically driven world, the lack of social interaction can be pretty harmful for our species, which is why, people get depressed or being lonely all the time. I mean, after all, we've evolved as a species for hundreds of thousands of years to be interacting with one another, making it quite hard to function very well long-term if we were too isolated. So up next, now we have a different disorder that often causes harm to many different soldiers throughout military history, and that is what we call PTSD, also known as post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is something that often occurs in combat because the human mind doesn't always handle the stress of war very long, nor is capable even processing the horrific violence that one can see in warfare. I mean, after all, just imagine being in a state of perpetual fear for your own life. And it's even worse when you're seeing the deaths of your fellow human beings up close in combat, people that you may be friends with. And certainly that has a traumatic effect on a human being. I even know from my own grandfather's experiences in World War II on the Western Front. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, the bloodiest battle for American soldiers in World War II. And he wrote a lot about his experiences. In fact, after the war, he was so psychologically damaged from his experiences that he spent like 6 months in a monastery just trying to process what he saw and come to terms with this horrific experience that he had as a 19-year-old in World War II. But in his poetry after the war, he said that so many people in his unit were getting killed that at one point he just stopped bothering to even learn the names of the new soldiers coming to the front lines because he knew that most of them would probably be dead soon. And so this is why, in general, war is such a horrific aspect of human society that, you have authoritarian leaders, for example, in World War II, Nazi Germany, or Imperial Japan invading other countries, or fascist Italy at the time, and, causes people to rise up to try to, stop these invasions from happening. And unfortunately, you get a lot of horrific experiences like this where people are having to risk their lives for an incredibly noble cause that, at the end of the day, in a perfect world, these type of wars would never have to happen. But the selfishness that can occur from our species is truly something that we have consistently failed to overcome for thousands and thousands of years, which is why new wars are forming all the time. Because when one person is put in a position of power to lead a country, and especially if there's not a checks and balances type system on that individual, it's very possible for that individual to then start launching wars due to some delusional glorification of conquest in their minds. But anyway, thinking about PTSD historically, this is something that goes back to ancient times as well. We have evidence of, for example, ancient Assyrian soldiers. The Assyrian Empire was in the Middle East. And Assyrians wrote about how their own soldiers' minds would change after war due to something like PTSD from what they witnessed in battle. And of course, especially in those days, though war may have been something that was more on top of people's minds as something that's happening perhaps a fair amount of time. There's obviously a lot of wars in ancient history. But the combat style, of course, is much more personal in ancient history, where you have people fighting with swords. And so you're not necessarily shooting at people from a distance, but you're doing hand-to-hand combat, which certainly I would imagine has an even stronger effect on the human mind to witness such violence right in front of your face with another human being, making sort of the killing of enemy combatants much, much more personal. And of course, we also have to remember that the brains of people a few thousand years ago are essentially the same as the brains of people today, So how they would be processing events like this are exactly how we would be processing it today. And next, we have another terrible mental disorder, and that is dementia. This is one that likely keeps many people up at night at some point in their lives, whether someone with dementia or are worried about yourself getting it. Because this is one of the worst diseases that a person can get, because it literally represents a human being essentially dying inside their own bodies. And what I mean by that is psychologically dying, because you essentially slowly forget who you are and who everyone around you is until you no longer know anything. And you're just kind of alive in a body with little mental awareness of those around you or what's going on. And it's an absolutely horrific thing to imagine someone going through. The ancient Greeks also recognized this illness and wrote about how people with old age suffered from this type of disease in their society as well. And it's certainly something that people will have to just continue working on scientifically to try to find a cure for, because it is certainly without a doubt one of the worst type of diseases that a human being can get. And it's one that I've witnessed in my own family. I'm sure everyone else has probably witnessed someone with it as well. In fact, my own grandfather, Benjamin McGraw Rush, who I had actually just talked about, who had the experiences of World War II, also suffered from dementia in the late stage of his life. So with that, all these different mental disorders are examples of why the scientific study of the human mind is just so important, and why we need people to dedicate more and more time to objectively studying these issues so we can help people navigate the world today. The good news is that we've come a long way since the ancient world and are in a much better position than any society before us to help people live the best lives possible, no matter what they are going through as a human being. So, as always, remember, billions of years led to you. So make the most of it.